Kadiza Sultana, the 17-year-old girl from Tower Hamlets in London, who left to join the Islamic State group in Syria, is believed to have been killed in an airstrike. The news came despite attempts by her family to bring her home. Our political editor, Khalil Charles, has this report.
The schoolgirl who attended this school in Bethnal Green travelled with two other teenagers to join the Islamic State group in Syria during the Easter holidays in 2015. A-level student Kadiza Sultana, seen here wearing all-white shoes, was 17 and is believed to have been killed in a Russian airstrike some weeks ago. She left the UK with Amira Abbas and Shamina Begum, both 15 years old, transiting via Istanbul in Turkey and then moving on to the Islamic State group's de facto capital in Raqqa. Her family travelled to Istanbul to trace the steps of the schoolgirls after making desperate appeals for information on the missing schoolgirls. The family lawyer who's been trying to secure Kadiza Sultana's return to the UK told the media that the family had done all they could.
Well, it's no less than any family member would have done for their own child. You know, you'd move heaven and earth to try and bring your kids back from any danger zone. And this family had made every effort and stretched every sinew to try and have their daughter, their sibling back home. That was always the situation when you have a person in the war zone that you know, the worst can happen. And the longer that they're in that danger zone, the more likely the risk can catch up with you. And unfortunately, it just wasn't possible to have her home before those risks caught up with her.
Sultana is believed to have married an American national of Somali origin who was killed in the fighting some months after their marriage. Sultana is reported as wanting to return home and recorded a phone call by ITV shortly before her death in which she said,
"I don't have a good feeling. Like, I feel scared. If something goes wrong, that's it."
The family lawyer said some good might emerge from these tragic events.
Well, it's most unfortunate that this situation has arisen, and one would hope that the only benefit out of this is as a tombstone and a testament to others of these are the risks actually involved in going to a war zone, to dissuade people from ever making that choice, really.
The fate of the other two girls is not known, but an estimated 800 Britons are believed to have left the UK to join the Islamic State group or other militant groups fighting in Syria and Iraq. Around 400 are estimated to have returned. Khalil Charles, The Report.
Well, joining me in the studio to discuss the implication of the death of Kadiza Sultana is Imran Shah, who's a political affairs correspondent, and I'm joined on the Skype by Tasnime Akunjee, who's the family lawyer that we heard from in that clip. Tasnime, let me come to you first. I mean, we heard you saying there that the family had done everything they could. The reality is that this is a double tragedy, isn't it? That the moment when the girls left was a tragedy, and this is an even greater one.
Well, particularly in light of the fact that Kadiza had expressed her desire to come back home, it's the irony of ironies that somebody who's made that clear and has made efforts to achieve that then finds herself sort of dead before that can be achieved, really.
Did you get the sense, talking to the family, that perhaps the picture that she'd built up in her mind before she left had been eradicated by the experience of being there?
I mean, the conversations between anyone in Raqqa and their family by definition should be extremely measured, as well as subtle. You never know who's listening in to those conversations, and so you can't. It's on rare occasions where someone can be explicit when they're absolutely sure that their conversations are secure. So she didn't really go too much into her reasoning beforehand, but it's certainly the case that she very quickly changed her mind and communicated that to her family once she was out there.
And there was some talk, I believe, in those phone conversations of her trying to get out. Is that really possible, or is it something which, is virtually impossible given the conditions that Raqqa is in?
Well, I mean, it is possible even now, but it's fraught with terminal danger. There are many hurdles to overcome, and each one of those hurdles is life-threatening. So the only reason why anyone would want to even risk that is because to stay is even more dangerous, as Khadija's and her family have found, really.
Okay. Imran Shah, let me just bring you into the conversation a bit here. The kind of framework, the political framework that all this has happened in, do you think that perhaps that will be altered by Khadija's death, that there'll be perhaps a more serious debate than we've had so far about what radicalisation is, why people travel to Syria?
I think given, when you look at the way in which this story is reported in a very individual case that has no connection to the wider sort of issue of Islamophobia, not just in the UK, but generally in the West. And what we've seen, especially in France, when there's a real sort of institutional increase of Islamophobia, there are more people that are essentially more willing to go to ISIS. So whilst we sort of hope, you know, that this case will be a deterrent if Islamophobia increases in the UK, we'll see more and more people essentially going over there. And this is the thing that we need to understand, especially of my generation and the generation above me, is that we're dealing with a Muslim population that is growing up in a surroundings where on the media, social media, you know, out on the streets, elsewhere, they're being told that they are scum, essentially, that they are a problem to the country, and that there is no any sense of place or any sense of dignity here. And for people who are growing up in that scenario, there is a situation where, you know, where do I see that sense of dignity? You know, where do I find that? And they're very, very vulnerable in that state. And we as a community, we don't actually give them that sense of identity, that Islamic identity specifically. We tell them how to fast, how to pray and whatnot, but what is their role in this world? You know, what is their role in society? How is it that they're going to essentially be that example for the people? Because, you know, the youth here, they're going to be politicized. You know, you're not going to look at that stuff here and abroad and not be politicized. So we, as people who are looking at the next generation, we have to make sure that we are the example. We are the people that are setting good political, effective and productive examples of how to air their grievances. And in that state, at least then they have a space in their society, in their community, where they are able to elicit some kind of dignity when, you know, when you have most of their surroundings is doing the opposite. At the moment, you have a vacuum, and anybody who's in that vacuum is just simply dangling. And as a consequence, anybody that comes with the promise of dignity, of freedom, of equality, no matter how deceptive it is, and especially ISIS, which is very deceptive, there's going to be some number of people that's going to fall for that.
Tasnime, does that kind of general explanation, do you think, fit with this family or with this person? Because we're down to the cases of individuals here that there's a sense of dislocation from the society around them, and that's one of the, I guess, what they call the push factors that gets people, perhaps some people, a minority of people, to take the step of going to Syria.
No, I think that's accurate. I mean, as you've rightly said, the reporting around this has been focused on the pull factors, the ISIS propaganda, whereas, you know, that those pull factors are there generally in the environment, in the internet, in, you know, all around the world. But we have to think about, well, who's biting and who's listening to that message. And that means that it's the people who are feeling not enfranchised with their current situation in wherever they are, UK, France, Belgium, where have you. And there are push factors there, and no one's focusing on those. And the fact is that it's backward thinking. We can't do much about other people's pull factors. We can't do much about, let's say, Israel doing what it's doing and calling upon Jews from around Europe and what have you to come and join them, you know, in their state-building exercise. And we can't do very much about ISIS putting the call out either. But what we can do is we can address the push factors that exist in the jurisdictions that our authorities have control over. We can address the issue of a lacuna of information around the ISIS problem or the Middle East problem generally, because we are talking about children, but we're also talking about young people who are capable of critical analysis. Now, what we have is a problem where, because of the securitization around even conversations around this, most imams don't want to talk about this issue for fear that they'll draw focus from the authorities negatively towards themselves. So there's very little points of information, of actual information, that young people can go to and actually, critically analyze propaganda on both sides. And I feel that this lacuna of information is a contributory factor to why people at crossroads in their lives, in their teens, some of them make the decision to go to a war zone. And, most people would think that going to a war zone is an obvious danger. But most people, I would ask them to cast their minds back to when they were 16 and the, frankly, very stupid things they did then themselves, really, or whatever they may be. So we have to factor that in, and I think we've got our thinking wrong on this issue.
Mm. Imran, do you think that part of the problem is, you were saying that, given the nature of the society and the nature of the kind of place of the Muslim community in it and the level of Islamophobia, that it's no good wishing that people weren't going to become politicised. But do you think that one of the problems that the government has is it really doesn't like any form of politicisation other than kind of, very, very mainstream forms of participation, and therefore it doesn't really have either the ability and certainly not the interest to distinguish between those forms of kind of politicisation which might be opposed to the current system and those forms of politicisation which are allied to terrorism or allied to the Islamic State. And it doesn't really feel like making that kind of distinction.
Look, we're living in a society where even the Green Party is being investigated by the MI5, at least they were yesterday. So, even that level of radical politics is something suspect from the establishment that we live in now. And we know from Prevent that there has been a number of cases, quite a number of cases, increasing even, month by month, that, kids who go through Prevent are either underconfident, angry, or feel that they don't belong here. So, the Prevent, which is meant to sort of stop radicalisation, is actually playing a factor in actually triggering that journey, beginning that journey. So you have to ask the question, what extent is the government actually trying to stop this and unintentionally making it worse? Or what extent are they actually deliberately trying to do this? Because there's been, academics, security personnel, teachers, hospitals, NHS staff, who have all said that this policy is toxic, is absolutely discriminatory, Islamophobic, and absolutely toxic. Yet the government is only listening to the Henry Jackson Society, the Quillian Foundation, and these sorts of people that only fit their ideological narrative. So you then have to ask this question now, after what, 2-3 years of doubt, that is the government actually institutionalising Islamophobia for its own political aims? Is it trying to divide and rule the country in order to try and push its own agenda, its own really privatised agenda as well?
Tasnime, do you have any news about what might have happened to the other two girls that went out there at the same time? Are there any contacts between the families?
Well, we're aware that they're alive, but we don't know anything more than that, really.
And you don't know whether they have a similar desire to come back now?
We don't know that, and we wouldn't articulate it if we did, because it would put them into immediate danger.
And finally, you were saying that that if there is a silver lining to this cloud, it might be that greater awareness of the risks and difficulties involved here becomes widespread.
I mean, silver lining in this context is maybe stretching it, but it's the only value that's positive in any way that might come out of this absolute tragedy.
Okay. Tasnime Akunjee and Imran Shah, thank you very much for joining us, but I'm afraid that's all we've got time for in this part of the programme. Now, we'll be taking a short break, but when we come back, we'll have a roundup of the day's main news headlines. And